When I turned 18, my family's dark tradition began. Growing up, I always sensed something was wrong with my family. We were normal on the surface, 2 parents, a brother, a sister, and a big old house at the edge of town. But there were unspoken rules, strange traditions that no one ever explained to me, just whispered reminders from my mother. Always close your door at night. Never leave the house after dark. If you hear it, don't acknowledge it. I thought they were just overprotective until the night of my 18th birthday. The day had been uneventful. My parents were quieter than usual, their smiles more strained. At dinner, they didn't speak much, just exchanged nervous glances over the table. My siblings were strangely absent, and when I asked where they were, my father said they had been sent away for the weekend. It didn't make sense, but I was too distracted by the tension in the air to question it further. After dinner, my parents sat me down in the living room. The atmosphere was suffocating, thick with a dread I couldn't quite place. "It's time you knew the truth, Lila," my mother began, her voice trembling. "This family, we have a responsibility, a duty to the house." My father handed me an old, leather-bound book. It was worn and brittle, the pages yellowed with age. The cover bore a single word in faded gold: Oath. I opened it cautiously, my hands shaking. Inside, I found page after page filled with names. Names of people I didn't recognize, followed by dates and strange symbols. The last name on the list was my mother's, dated the day she turned 18. "You see," my father continued, his voice unnervingly calm, "this house, it's different. It's been in our family for generations, passed down with a responsibility. The house has needs, and once every generation, someone in the family must satisfy them." I stared at him, not understanding. "What do you mean? What needs?" My mother took my hand, her grip icy cold. "There's something in the house, Lila, something that hungers, and it's your turn to feed it." I felt the blood drain from my face as her words sank in. "What are you talking about?" I stammered. "Feed it what?" She didn't answer. Instead, she and my father stood up and led me to the basement door. I had never been allowed down there, another one of the unspoken rules. The door was always locked, and I had assumed it was just a storage space. But as they unlocked it and the door creaked open, a foul stench wafted up from the darkness below. "I'm sorry, Lila," my father whispered as he nudged me forward, "but you have to go. We all had to when it was our time." The basement steps creaked underfoot as I descended, the air growing colder with each step. My heart pounded in my chest, fear twisting in my gut. The light from the kitchen dimmed, swallowed by the blackness below. I reached the bottom and looked back, but my parents had closed the door behind me. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. The basement was larger than I had imagined, the walls lined with shelves of old, dusty jars and forgotten trinkets. But it wasn't the clutter that caught my attention. It was the door at the far end of the room, a massive, iron door that didn't belong in a house like ours. It was ancient, covered in strange, unreadable symbols, and as I approached, I felt a deep, unnatural cold seeping from behind it. The book clutched in my hand seemed to vibrate, as if it had a life of its own, urging me forward. My hands trembled as I reached for the door, but before I could touch it, a sound echoed through the basement. A low, guttural growl, like something was moving on the other side. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I was paralyzed with fear. Then, the door began to open on its own, slowly, with a loud, grinding noise. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was rooted to the spot. I could only watch as the darkness behind the door seemed to ripple, and a pair of glowing, blood-red eyes emerged from the void, fixing on me with a hunger that made my skin crawl. "Welcome, Lila," a voice whispered from the darkness, a voice that wasn't human. It was deep, ancient, and filled with an unspeakable malice. "I've been waiting for you." I couldn't move. The voice, deep and guttural, seemed to crawl under my skin, rooting me to the cold, damp floor of the basement. Those eyes, those awful blood-red eyes, never blinked, never shifted their gaze from mine. They pierced through me, seeing everything I had ever been and everything I would ever become. And then, with an unnatural slowness, the thing in the darkness began to emerge. The first thing I noticed was the sound. An awful, wet, squelching noise, like something being pulled from the depths of a swamp. It was followed by the stench, a sickening mix of rot and decay that filled my nostrils and made my stomach churn. But it was what I saw next that nearly drove me mad with terror. It was a hand, or at least, something that resembled a hand, covered in slimy, mottled flesh that glistened in the dim light. Long, spindly fingers curled around the edge of the door, their tips ending in sharp, yellowed claws. Another hand followed, and then a head, misshapen and grotesque, with skin stretched tight over an angular skull. The eyes, glowing like embers, were set deep in its sockets, and below them, a wide, lipless mouth stretched into a twisted grin, revealing rows of jagged, blackened teeth. The creature pulled itself through the doorway, its body impossibly long and sinuous, like a serpent made of nightmares. It moved with a fluid grace, almost hypnotic in its horror, and as it did, the shadows seemed to cling to it, warping and twisting around its form. "I've been waiting so long," it hissed, its voice dripping with a perverse delight. 18 years, and now you're finally here." My mind screamed at me to run, to get as far away from this abomination as possible, but my body refused to obey. I could only stand there, helpless, as the creature slithered closer, its foul breath washing over me in waves. What do you want from me?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. The creature's grin widened, and it leaned in closer, until its face was mere inches from mine. "Your family made a pact, long ago," it said, its breath hot and rancid against my skin. "A sacrifice every generation to keep me from claiming them all. And now, it's your turn." My heart pounded in my chest as the realization sank in. This was the truth my parents had kept hidden from me all these years. This was the reason for the rules, the warnings. They had known this moment was coming, and they had done nothing to stop it. They had prepared me for this, raised me like a lamb to the slaughter. "No," I whispered, shaking my head in denial. "No, I won't do it." The creature's eyes narrowed, and its grin faltered for the briefest moment before it returned, even more twisted and cruel. "You don't have a choice, Lila," it said almost pityingly. "Your fate was sealed the moment you were born." With a sudden burst of energy, I pushed myself away from the creature, stumbling backward toward the stairs. I had to get out, had to escape this nightmare. But as I turned to flee, the creature's long, clawed hand shot out, grabbing my ankle with a grip like iron. I screamed as I was pulled back, my body slamming against the cold, hard floor. "You can't run from me, child," it growled, dragging me closer. "No one ever has." I kicked and thrashed, desperate to break free, but its hold was unyielding. The creature loomed over me, its twisted form casting a shadow that seemed to swallow all light. I felt its claws digging into my skin, cold and sharp, and I knew that if I didn't do something, I would be lost to this thing forever. In a moment of blind panic, I remembered the book still clutched in my hand. Without thinking, I swung it at the creature's head with all the strength I could muster. The book connected with a sickening thud, and for a moment, the creature recoiled, hissing in pain and surprise. Taking advantage of its distraction, I scrambled to my feet and bolted for the stairs. My legs felt like they were made of lead, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I reached the door and threw it open, the warm light of the kitchen spilling down into the basement. But as I started to climb the stairs, I heard the creature's voice behind me, filled with a terrible, mocking laughter. "You can't escape, Lila. I'll find you wherever you go. The Pact demands it." I didn't look back. Couldn't. I stumbled into the kitchen, slamming the basement door shut behind me. My parents were waiting for me, their faces pale and drawn. They didn't say a word as I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. They didn't need to. The look in their eyes said everything. They knew this would happen, and they had accepted it. But I hadn't. I wasn't going to let this thing take me, not without a fight. Somehow, I would find a way to break the pact, to end this nightmare once and for all. But as I lay there on the cold tile, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was already too late, that the creature's words were true. Because even now, as I write this, I can still feel its eyes on me, watching, waiting. And I know, deep down, that it's only a matter of time before it comes for me again. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every creak of the house, every whisper of the wind outside sent chills down my spine. I sat on my bed, clutching the leather-bound book to my chest like a lifeline. My parents had retreated to their room after I escaped the basement, and I hadn't seen them since. The silence between us was heavy, filled with the weight of unspoken truths and resigned fear. I knew I couldn't stay in that house. The creature's words echoed in my mind. "I'll find you wherever you go." But I had to try. I had to get away, to put as much distance between myself and that thing as possible. Maybe there was a chance, however slim, that it would lose its grip on me if I was far enough away. At first light, I packed a small bag with whatever I could carry. Clothes, some food, and the book. I didn't know why I kept it with me. Part of me felt that it was somehow connected to the creature, that it might hold the key to breaking the pact. The thought of leaving it behind terrified me even more than taking it with me. I crept downstairs, careful not to make a sound. The house was eerily quiet, as if it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. My parents' door was closed, and I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should say goodbye. But what could I possibly say? They had given me up to that thing, resigned to the same fate they had faced themselves. There was nothing left to say. As I reached the front door, I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible scratching at the back of the house. My heart leaped into my throat, and I froze, listening. The scratching grew louder, more insistent, as if something was trying to claw its way inside. Panic surged through me, and I yanked the door open, bolting out into the cool morning air. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away from that house, from that basement, from the thing that was surely hunting me now. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the empty streets. I didn't stop running until my lungs burned and my legs gave out beneath me. I collapsed on a bench in a small park on the edge of town, gasping for breath, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. But even here, miles from the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that those terrible red eyes were still on me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I looked around, half expecting to see the creature slithering out of the shadows, but there was nothing, just the quiet, peaceful park, bathed in the soft light of dawn. I didn't feel safe, but I knew I couldn't keep running forever. I needed help. I needed answers. There was one person I could think of who might know something about the pact, about how to break it: my grandmother. She had lived with us until I was 10, when she suddenly moved away. No one ever talked about why she left, but I remembered her warning me once, in a hushed voice, that our family was cursed, that I needed to be careful. At the time, I had thought she was just an old woman with too many strange ideas. But now I realized she might have been the only one who truly understood what was happening. It took hours to walk to the small, secluded cabin where my grandmother lived. I had only been there once, years ago, but I remembered the way. The sun was high in the sky by the time I arrived, its warmth doing little to dispel the chill that had settled into my bones. The cabin was old and weathered, surrounded by thick woods that seemed to press in from all sides. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding. There was no answer at first, and I knocked again, louder this time. Finally, I heard shuffling from inside, and the door creaked open to reveal my grandmother's frail figure, her eyes widening in shock when she saw me. "Lila," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" "I need your help, Grandma," I said, my voice breaking. It's about the house, the pact." Her expression darkened, and she glanced over my shoulder as if expecting someone, or something, to be standing behind me. "You shouldn't have come here," she said, her voice low and urgent. "It's not safe. Please," I begged, tears welling up in my eyes. "It came for me. That thing in the basement. I don't know what to do. She hesitated for a long moment before stepping aside and motioning for me to enter. The cabin was small and cluttered, filled with the scent of herbs and old wood. She led me to a worn armchair by the fire and sat across from me, her hands trembling as she reached for a cup of tea that had gone cold. "I warned them," she said quietly, more to herself than to me. "I told your parents that this day would come, but they didn't listen. They thought they could keep you safe by keeping you ignorant by following the rules. But the Pact, it always comes due." I nodded, too afraid to speak, and handed her the book. She took it, her eyes narrowing as she flipped through the pages, her lips moving silently as she read the names and symbols. "This book," she murmured, "is the record of the Pact. It's ancient, older than our family, older than this town. It was made with something dark, something that demands blood to keep it at bay. Is there a way to break it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My grandmother looked up at me, her eyes filled with a deep sorrow. "There's only one way to break the Pact, Lila. You have to destroy the source, the creature itself. But it won't be easy. It's bound to the house, to the very land it was built on. You'll need more than just strength and courage to face it." "Then what do I need?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. She reached into the folds of her shawl and pulled out a small, ancient-looking dagger, its blade inscribed with strange symbols similar to those in the book. "This," she said, handing it to me, "this is the only thing that can kill it. But be warned, once you strike, there's no going back. The creature will fight with everything it has, and if you fail..." She didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. If I failed, the creature would claim me, and the Pact would continue, stronger than ever. I took the dagger, feeling its cold weight in my hand. Fear gnawed at my insides, but there was no other choice. I couldn't keep running, and I couldn't live with the knowledge that this horror would continue, that someday it might come for someone else. Maybe my own children, if I survived long enough to have them. "I'll do it," I said, my voice steady despite the terror clawing at my heart. "I'll kill it." My grandmother nodded, her expression grim. "Be careful, Lila, and remember you can't hesitate. The moment you see it, strike. Don't give it a chance to defend itself." I left the cabin just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, the dagger tucked securely in my bag. The walk back to the house was long, and every shadow seemed to hold a hidden threat. But this time I wasn't running. I was going back to end this. By the time I reached the house, night had fallen. The windows were dark, the house looming like a great, silent beast waiting for its prey. My parents were nowhere to be seen, and a part of me wondered if they had already been claimed by the creature for failing to deliver me. But I couldn't think about that now. I entered the house, the door creaking ominously behind me. The basement door was open, a thin sliver of light spilling out into the hallway. I could hear it again, the low, guttural growl, the wet, slithering noise as the creature moved in the darkness below. This time, I didn't hesitate. I descended the stairs, the dagger clutched tightly in my hand. The creature was waiting for me, its red eyes glowing in the dark, its mouth twisted into that familiar, twisted grin. "Back so soon?" It hissed, the words dripping with mockery. "I knew you couldn't stay away." I didn't reply. My hand tightened around the dagger, and I took a step forward. The creature seemed to sense the change in me, its grin faltering as it realized what I intended to do. "You can't kill me, child," it snarled, its voice rising to a terrible, ear-piercing shriek. "I am bound to this house, to your bloodline. You'll die trying." But I didn't listen. I lunged at the creature, the dagger flashing in the dim light. It moved faster than I expected, its body twisting and contorting as it tried to avoid the blade. But I didn't stop. I struck again and again, each blow fueled by years of fear and anger. The creature let out a blood-curdling scream as the dagger finally found its mark, sinking deep into its flesh. Its body convulsed, the red glow in its eyes flickering and fading. The shadows that had clung to it like a shroud began to dissolve, and for the first time, I saw the creature for what it truly was. A twisted, withered thing, ancient and frail, its power waning as it clung to the last vestiges of its cursed existence. With one final, desperate lunge, I drove the dagger into its heart. The creature let out a final, agonized cry before collapsing into a pile of ash and bone, its form disintegrating into nothingness before my eyes. The basement was silent, the oppressive darkness lifting as the creature's presence faded. I stood there, breathing heavily, the dagger still clutched in my trembling hand. It was over. The creature was dead, and the pact was broken. As I made my way back upstairs, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over me, but also a deep sadness. The house, once a place of terror, now felt empty, almost lifeless. My parents were gone, likely claimed by the creature in its final moments. But I was alive, and for the first time in my life, I was free. I left the house that night, never to return. I buried the dagger deep in the woods, where no one would ever find it, and I set out to start a new life, far away from the horrors of my past. But even now, years later, I still have nightmares. I still hear the creature's voice in my dreams, whispering to me from the darkness, reminding me that some things can never truly be forgotten. And sometimes, late at night, I wake with the feeling that I'm being watched, that those terrible blood-red eyes are still out there, somewhere, waiting for the day when they can find me again. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed it and want more spine-chilling tales, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. There's always another dark story waiting to be told, and I can't wait to share it with you. Stay tuned for more, and remember, sometimes the scariest things are those that linger just out of sight.